was.
But then it was just this morning that I read this lesson, and I went,
well, I don't know if y'all remember it or not, but there was a movie years ago where the army ants were eating an island up. All right, and did you know what they did? They said, well, they won't come across the river. But they did. They made their own boats out of leaves and floated across. The ants did, and floated across and kept eating everything in their way. Fire ants will do that.
Yeah.
Fire ants will actually get together as a group and float in the water and go where they want to go.
At the bottom ones.
Yeah.
And then they trade places. Where they're young.
So it's when you look at them, as I read that, and particularly I got it later in the 6th, I'd already heard about that, but he was in here today and we'll talk about it. But you got to realize, did this all happen by circumstance?
No.
Where did the intelligence, you got to realize the intelligence of an ant.
We're a lot of animals. We think we're so intelligent.
Well, it's just like watching. It's just we were this morning sitting there having breakfast, and the rabbit was under the holly trees, and the squirrel was getting up and skinning down a wire to the bird feeder and getting in the bird feeder to eat. They're engineers, right? I mean, how many of you ever watched beavers work?
Yes.
Well, I used to think it was amazing. I was duck hunting once in Raft Creek Bottoms, and we come upon, all of a sudden, we knew that there was no water there, and we were going to go. Well, all of a sudden, there was water. And overnight, the beavers had taken not wood, but leaves and dammed up a whole area. You know, they when we had a farm, they put 40 acres of beans underwater in one night by throwing up a dam. You know, so.
Well, we had a mouse problem one time years ago, and so they said, well, set a trap, put bacon, cheese, and all that, and so this one, he kept coming back, and I watched, I had to watch it, and at first I couldn't stand it, and I put a piece of bacon, I think, on this little mouse trap, and I watched him, and he ate all around that piece of whatever I put there. He didn't set that trap off. He just.
Well, anyway, so much for all of that. But basically, what are we thinking about? I laughed about it. Easy answers, maybe. Matter of fact, that's what made me write what I wrote for this morning about Abraham wanting to answer his own prayers, and we do that at times too. But when you look at it, we're in the actual 9th chapter, basically, of the Book of Deuteronomy. But if you remember going through the first 7, he was doing this whole thing of remembering. Do you remember? He was trying to reemphasize that in us. It's sort of like Joyce says all of a sudden this morning on the way out here, why am I getting text messages that I deleted back in March? You know, So all of a sudden things come. But remembering was the key in those first 7 chapters. And then we looked at the 8th chapter, and the main theme in it was sin. It was a serious negativeness about what was going on, and one of the major things was forgetfulness. And all of a sudden, he's talking about his forgetfulness in his own life, forgetting things. But do you do that? Do you obviously from hearing you talk a while ago, you have that, and so when you realize where it was. But then in the 9th chapter, where we're dealing with now, and what he brings some of it out, but he's also going to go into the 10th. But they were reminded of the invincible God. They didn't think God was invincible. That's why they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, because they thought they knew more than God did, and that was one of the things. So the trouble here, though, is he's writing. There's a very positive trouble in here, and the word really and truly, to most of you, would not think of it being positive, but it is rebellion. It's an action, and you're there, and so you can't believe. Did you read if you read that book, I read the 7th chapter or the 9th chapter, you find all of these things. Can you imagine him writing about this? Here's what he's talking to them about: getting them ready to go into Canaan, which, by the way, was 7 nations in it. Did you know that? When the biggest and the meanest were the Anakites, and they were there. But then what's missing? When you look at this, God didn't choose them because they were faithful. He chose them because they were stubborn. He goes in here and he said, when you read the 9th chapter, he didn't choose them because they were a religious nation. All right? But to people who are arrogant, and that was in verse 4, stubborn. George saying, when she was reading her, she said, we don't use that word very much anymore, do we? Stubborn. But it was there. And that was in the verses 6 and 13 and 27. Rebellious, all right? They were also provocative. They were corrupt. They idolatrous. They had their own idols they were worshiping. They were sinful. And this is one of the things we were getting into. They were absolutely evil in a lot of ways. And you got to realize Moses is talking to the generation rest to what has transpired in their lives on this 40 years of wandering. And they did it because of the unbelieving, disobedient, and think about it, is he said they were wicked. So there were characteristics there of it. And you realize when I was thinking of that and looking at it, I thought, if that's all of it, God, you're saying that about them, what does he say about us?
Yeah.
Are we all of those things?
Of course.
And so
Indeed.
we're looking at all of this and thinking where we are. So when I get to thinking about it, this is where we find ourselves as we are beginning today in this study of reckless abandon we have in our lives. And so that was it. So I got
blessed to have Moses go to God for them, these evil people.
Well, on that very first page, he gets to saying things a lot about what, when you hear him say what he was. I've been there. All of us from hearing you talk a while ago have been there. You left stuff and laying there. And a lot of times, it was so funny. We had been down and I had bought some clothes and I had my phone with me, but when I got back home, I didn't have my phone. So I called Matthew back and says, Matthew, is my phone down there anywhere? He said, no. They looked around. He said, ring it. And so we called on Joy. No, it's not ringing here. So I come back home and we got to looking for it. It was nowhere in the house. We kept calling it and ringing it. Well, I had set it on the console of the car. Well, guess what it did? Mm-hmm. It didn't stay there.
Of course not.
It slid all the way back under in an area that you have to pull everything out to get down to get to it, and that's where it was ringing. So when we do that, we get lost in it, and that's what happens to the generation rest. They didn't really have any idea where they were and what they were doing. And I ask you, and when you think about that, I like his first question he had for us. What is your method for not forgetting? Moses. Oh, posting notes. Posting notes. Okay. Hey, did you know I had a friend of mine who worked with me at SP many years ago. His dad worked for 3M.
Oh boy.
And guess what he developed?
Post-it.
And I said, David, did your dad make any money off of that? And he said, when you work for a company, they get the royalties, you don't get them. And that's the way it was with American Hospital Supply Corporation. Anything we actually had an invention in, they owned it. And so that
those were made to save the places in the church hymnal.
What was that?
That's what I heard.
Postage was?
Designed for people that flipping through the church hymnal, stick a post-it note, and then you can turn right to it.
Matter of fact, you laugh, but I have gone and straightened out hymnals, and I find post-it notes stuck in them from where somebody's had them,
Yeah.
Particularly if you're doing a group up and you're singing a lot of them, and they say, okay, we're going to sing this one, this one, this one. I've laughed at times, Kathy Sue. I wondered if we ought to put in the book rack a post-it pad for everybody there. So when you think, but do what? Yeah, and so all of us have a method. All of us have a method of.
I heard that was a mistake too. That he meant for the glue to be really stick, but it didn't stick. So they found another use for it. I thought that was cool.
But you realize all of And a lot of things come about because of mistakes and become a situation.
Well, the best way to not lose car keys is to always put them in the same
Same
place.
place, wherever that
Always,
is.
because if they're not there, they're lost.
Hey, I'm with you, Candy. That's a great thought, but we don't do it, do we?
I do. I do.
I mean, we had it replaced, and that's where they always are, but now and then.
And then they're lost
They
if they're
didn't
not
get
there.
there.
Well, you know,
I was not gonna be late today. I put everything where I could get it. I knew where the car keys were and everything else. I had a load of stuff washing, and I wanted to wash the dog's collars because they got so muddy. And my big dog came in late. I took the collar off of her, wiped her off, and then I couldn't find the collar. I couldn't figure out where it was, so I was late today. And I went around there, and I put it on the microwave of all places.
but you know, and he was talking about, you know, the part that I got a big kick out of it. He was talking about the examples of they were having trouble once they'd come back. You got to realize he brings in Nehemiah. All right. Well, Nehemiah was around 450 BC. All right, but Ezra was just ahead of him, and so there was 3 different exile coming back to Jerusalem, and they were building it, putting it up, but they still had all of the enemies and everything sneaking in, sort of like we have at our border. It's just open, people just come through. But I love what he said. You know, it was interesting. And Nehemiah said, the easiest thing to do is close the gate.
Close the gate.
That is so funny. Yeah.
Do what?
Occam's razor. You know what
Yeah.
Occam's razor is?
Yeah.
You know, he was, I actually wrote this down because I looked it up, I knew it, but William of Occam of the 14th century, he developed this way of problem solving, which is like the simplest solution. And the simplest definition is that the simplest solution is the best, which is not always, but the best. It works because you take out a lot of extraneous things if you start with the simplest explanation rather than. And the big one is horses and hooves. If you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras. And why would that be?
But that only works when you're not in Africa.
That's right.
Well, see, you're not going to think about zebras being around here. You know, it's more likely to be horses.
Speaking of zebras, what do they call it? What do they call the animal that's half zebra and half horse?
Oh, that's got a name.
Oh, it's in a song too.
Zorse.
Yeah, they have a name for
Oh, really?
And we were watching one of the last series of the 16th season of Heartland, and she was training one.
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
She who?
The little girl that's the main character in it.
One of the characters for Heartland.
She's a horse whisperer.
oh, she can do Zeus's too, huh?
Never heard of it.
How's she with people?
One that was next
Is it
door,
for every
lived
problem,
about 50,
there is going to be
20
a
miles
solution
from
that is
Santa
elegant,
Maria.
simple, and completely wrong.
In San Ynez Valley.
Well, and that's very true in a lot of cases.
That's why you start with the simplest, because it's the easiest one to test and eliminate if it doesn't work. Anyway.
Well, then you're going back into homes.
Well, you know,
It's a really simple
but you think of that, you know, a lot of times the simplest answer, all right, may not be the easiest to do.
Trying to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? For instance, if you read that down at the bottom of that page where he's talking about Deuteronomy 9:6, where he says, now then it's not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are stubborn people.
Yeah.
So he answers the own question. He says, yeah, they have it. You got to realize what you're at. And he goes on and talks about his dog being stopping 6 inches short of the leash. But they could have really gone into the land. What he's trying to tell them, you could have done this 40 years ago. But your procrastination, your stubbornness, your arrogance, your sinfulness, whatever, kept you. God says you're not going. You got, and so it was there. And so when you think, they stopped. One of the most fascinating discoveries is when we were reading back in the first chapter that it was 11 days. They could have gone from Horeb all the way into the promised land in 11 days. It took them 9 years, 39 years and 11 months and how many days, 11 days, 19 days is what it was. So, we have Moses now sitting on the bank of the Jordan River. He's just mere yards away from the promised land, which has, like I said, has 7 nations in it. But God says, I'm giving you this, And I was sort of laughing. Joy was showing us a picture a while ago. That our grandson, who's now probably 6'4", and his buddies, they all been on a cruise together, and all of them come to his shoulders. He's like he's this much taller than all of his buddies. All right, but you get to thinking about that. That's what they thought of the Anakites. They thought they were this big or taller. They were huge. And I love the way he writes in here. When I got to reading a lot of this, Moses even talked about him being scrawny. You're not very tall people. You're runts in a lot of ways. You're stubborn, and how would you have reacted being talked to like that?
Well, probably not well.
Well, Joyce says they earned it.
Well, they did. Yes.
Yeah, they did. But and when we think about it, but they were stubborn,
really think.
And their record skipped, and they were now 40 years late getting there. And so we look at this and wonder about it. It's like you said, though, when you think about all of this, think about taking care of your forgetfulness, how you're going to do it, the pattern you put things in. Do you all put everything back in the drawers exactly like you found them?
Yes.
Well, it's sort of like you go in the kitchen in there. Right now, we have a drawer that has all knives in it. And then we have a drawer with all forks in it.
Well, mine's not like that. Oh, you mean in here?
But no, at home you've got petitions in your drawer for in the kitchen you've got that. But you don't have that in your dresser, in your dresser drawers or anything like that, do you?
I don't.
No, but I have a place for everything.
Yeah.
And you put it there in that way and keep it that way all the time?
Yeah.
Well, it was so funny. Our house, on one of the burglaries, every drawer was turned upside down. Joy didn't want to touch anything. She wanted to scoop everything up and go throw it in the water or throw it away. Somebody else has messed up my order, and we do that at times, don't we? And we feel like that, But every one of us, we've reacted stubbornly in our lives as well. But I was reading that part where Moses said, "Here's the simple thing is do not be stubborn and listen to others." Whoa! How many times do we really listen? Well, we can listen, but do we really hear? There's a difference in knowing the two.
My husband used to say, "Pay attention." Because I guess he could see my eyes wandering. I'm really listening.
We have a two-year-old great granddaughter right now that is going through the twos. And it's taken them 40 minutes to get her in the car seat.
Yeah. No.
And what is her comment? Well, she says she's 2 years old. He says, I don't know.
No.
I'm not going.
No.
Well, this is what was happening to the Israelites. Rather than taking 40 minutes to get them in the car seat, it was taking them 40 years to get them into the Holy Lands, all right? And so here we are. We have that stubbornness. But as I got to reading Proverbs 11:14, I don't know if you looked at that or not, but I got to looking at it and thinking about it. Somebody may have it there. Read it right quick if you've got it. If not, I'll have to flip over to Proverbs.
No.
Proverbs 11:14.
Without wise leadership, a nation is in trouble, but with good counselors, there is safety. Now, this is the, obviously.
Yeah, well, the NIV says, for lack of guidance, a nation falls, and by many advisors make victory sure. But, when you think about all of this, here we are, when we have leaders that we need, and they're wise, and they're great advisors, One person's perspective in understanding is all of us by ourselves. You've heard all your life, 2 heads are better than one, right? I'm not always sure that works, because when people are as dumb as I am and he's my buddy, we're both dummies trying to do the same thing. It doesn't make it. But anyway, so we become severely limited, and this is what was transpiring with them. They weren't really listening. They weren't hearing what Solomon had said. They weren't there at all, and so they were there having it. So the leader may not have the facts, or many, or you could be blinded, but you got to have more than one putting it in. Yeah. It's sort of like I was reading something this morning on the Global Methodist Church Transitional Leadership Committee of getting ready for the General Conference that's coming up later in Costa Rica. And they were talking about what they were putting together and all this sort of thing. And then I was reading what they were the pros and cons and how they were coming together on all of it. That takes leadership to do that. Yes. Right? You got to realize it's taken leadership to put the GMC together. Right. And we had it and it's got there, but you can put it there, but now it's got to be organized. And this is what was happening to the Israelites. They were not organized. They just sort of rambled and meandered, as one word said. So to be a wise leader at home or at church or at work, and so we have to seek the counsel of others. And that's why we have a leadership committee. That's why I've often laughed. They send things to me and say, well, you're the pastor of the church. And I said, yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm the boss of it. It means I'm just the pastor of it. The committee. I said, the church is run by the congregation. So you have to seek counsel and all that. So I got to thinking about that. And he goes into 24:6. It's along the same areas that we're looking at. And so why is it hard to take advice? Now, Mark asked that question, and you think, I realize he's asking the question because I have a feeling he's experienced it.
Stubbornness.
Everybody does.
It's the same thing. If you think, well, let me speak for myself. If I think I'm right, you're going to have a hard time convincing me otherwise, because I'm really stubborn about that kind of stuff. No, you just don't.
Matter of fact,
my situation.
That's not a bad thing. Matter of fact, Joy and I made a comment to a friend last evening on text message. He sent me back a foot long. I mean, a foot long. It was literally, I was reading and reading and reading. And I thought, I would love to be able to see things with rose-colored glasses like you do. Right? And I said, and then I got to thinking about it because he's having admiration for people that literally shot him down a couple of times. And I'm thinking, Lord, I admire him. Can I be like that? This is the thing you look at. But we're stubborn. We're stiff-necked. I like the way it talked about you have a stiff neck. Well, I get a stiff neck. Well, Cassie Sue can say she was sort of moving last week a little bit gingerly with hers.
I still am.
And you still are. But that's a different kind of stiff neck, though, Kathy Sue. But when we're seeing all of this, why is it so hard to see that doing things our way may not be the best way? He asked that question. We've asked ourselves that question. I've asked myself that question. Why?
I just think we're wired that way.
Wired that way. Well, he says we're absolutely stubborn.
That too.
And so.
Well, sometimes you just want to hurry and get something done. And somebody else says, no, we need to consult with so and so. Oh, really?
They need confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Well, you think about it. I mean, it started with Adam and Eve. They were told not to eat the fruit, and what did they do? They were stubborn. They wouldn't listen. They didn't believe.
It had to be good.
Well, and let's back up a little bit. Did he ever have pet stories like he did for
Briggs
for his dogs?
Mm-mm. Oh, well,
But you do. You can tell us a story about don't break up a fight.
Yeah, well, don't break up a fight. But Bonnie, my big dog, sometimes she doesn't want to come in. She doesn't want me to do anything to her, and she will stop just short of where she knows I'm not fast enough to go over there and grab her.
Tell me, it's not God that's smiling.
Yeah,
God has a sense of humor.
Oh, I know. Yeah, he does great. I think the greatest sense of humor was that when Adam and Eve had sinned, they wound up making their clothes out of fig leaves. And then God was, that's another story. But
There's
anyway.
still a fine line between being stubborn and being smart.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a fine line, you know, like if you're right, don't give in. If you know
Well,
you're
I don't know
right.
how many times I just knew I was right and I wasn't.
Yeah,
Well, that
that
happens
too.
too, yeah.
If there's a fine line between stubborn and smart, and there's a fine line between smart and insane, then there must be an equally fine line between stubborn and insane.
I love your logic there. It's a good analogy. What if life went where a stubborn nature had limited your success? Anything, the stubborn nature of us having that characteristic of us, has it interfered? And you just said you found out you thought you were right, but you found out you were wrong. All right, all of us have. All right,
Sure.
but has it ever created a disaster for you?
Well, you see that happen when people get in jobs that they just can't obey the rules. And just have their own.
Yeah.
Don't think you started on that one.
We'll be here a while, right? But you got to realize being stubborn at times does limit us in our. Matter of fact, the individual I was talking about earlier, I tried to get him not to do something, and he stubbornly did it anyway, and then had to wind up. I kept saying, "You're going to reap the consequences." I don't know that don't get me wrong, you're right, but you need to not be stubborn enough to put it in writing and challenge the authorities with that, because you're going to wind up in trouble. So anyway, but that's what happens to us at times when we do that. But anyway, and I heard you say that your dog stops 6 inches from where you.
Where
Not
she can
necessarily
reach it.
6 inches. She knows how fast I can move.
Oh, okay.
And she will, because, you get close to the dog, you can just suddenly grab her. She knows where that distance is. And she'll stop and she'll just look at me. But you know what I found out that I can get her to come to me? They get muddy so much and I have to wipe them off. She loves being rubbed with a towel.
Oh.
So all I have to do is get the towel and say, "Come here." And she goes, "All right."
It's like a-
She wanted to be dirty. I just rub hard and then I grab her collar.
Well, let me ask you a question. In looking at all of this, what was your thoughts about, or your opinion of why Generation Test was so stubborn? Anybody? Stiff-neckedness?
They'd always done it that way.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I thought. They only knew what they had done in the past.
It's like going to a new church and you're starting something and they say, "Well, we never did it that way before."
Yeah.
And I think, you need to ask in advance, what were they going? It's sort of like some churches, we pray, forgive us of our trespass. Well, some churches do it as debts. And some denominations, not the Methodists as much as it was a friend of mine who was in the Presbyterian, he would go to a new church and he would say, "Which way do you say it?" So you look at all this, but you got to realize, Moses says, "I've seen this people," and indeed it was a stubborn people. That's what he was saying in 9:13. Then he goes down to the 27th, 28th. He says, "Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look at the stubbornness of this people or at the wickedness of their sin." In other words, God knew all about it, and Moses is telling them in words what God was saying to him to tell them. So we look at this, and that makes us wonder, that fifth question, what was it there? Well, the kind of stubbornness can literally and truly get us stuck, can it? It can get us in all sorts of situations. So it kept them, as he said, 39 years and 11 months and 19 days in the wilderness, So what do you think of it? But what did you think of his analogy on, and all of a sudden he dated himself? How long have you played a phonograph with a record that had an arm on it that you had to do that? And it would do that. It would skip and it would go. You couldn't get it to go on any further. Or if you bumped it, it might jump on over and pick up. But I thought that was interesting. But that happens to us in our lives. We get we get a groove messed up and we don't stay doing what we do, and all of a sudden we jump off, and so
CDs do that too.
do what?
CDs.
CDs.
That
All right,
too.
okay.
They do that too.
But you know, when you think of that, you know, stiff necked.
Either.
Have you ever assumed that God didn't understand your problem?
No.
No, I never even thought that.
You never even questioned that.
No,
I question God.
Well, I
Oh,
questioned
you,
it.
whoa. You said what again?
I did. When my husband died, I said, Lord, I'm not strong enough to live through this. You know, I mean, so that was to me questioning him.
Yeah.
But that was the only time I can really remember questioning God. I didn't question God when my parents died because I knew that was going to happen, you know. But when my husband died and I found him in the floor, I dropped my knees and said, Lord, I am not strong enough to handle this. I can't take this. I can't do this.
That's why He carried you.
Yeah.
That's that, you know.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I know that now, but I didn't
Footprints
know
in the
that
sand
then.
and all.
Well, the time just hurt him too bad. It's the
Yeah,
thing.
well,
I've been
I
through it too.
yeah.
Francis has, we've all been through it.
Yeah, I know
I was
several
just
of them.
telling Bobby the other day when we had our first child, and Mother came and stayed a couple of weeks, and when I drove her to the bus to go home, all the way home, I was saying, God, why did you give me a baby? What am I going to do with this baby? I have no idea. I need my mother here. So we had to do it.
Just do what you have to do.
Made lots of mistakes, but she's alive and well.
And she's a grandmother herself now, so
Probably ask her the same question.
ask the same question. But yeah, and her grandbaby has now put its feet in the Mediterranean Sea, and so she wasn't too happy because it was cold.
Oh, I bet.
But she's been in there. Matter of fact, we got a picture. They already have a life vest for Alice and a life vest. I can't believe them getting her in a kayak or a canoe. But anyway, you know, that's their life, not mine. But here we get to thinking about it. What did you think about the fact being is, you know, that every one of us at some time have acted stubbornly, and it also, in a way, Candy filled in with, look at the ants, see what the ants are doing. But he also made a comment that came from, he quoted from the 10th chapter, a situation that I have often wondered about, because to be Jewish, all males had to be circumcised. But he didn't stop there. He says in the 10th chapter, 16th verse, so circumcise your heart
I'm sorry, I read that.
Yeah, I read
and
that.
stiffen your neck no longer.
Yeah.
Well, you belong to the Methodist Church, right?
Yes.
You're a Wesleyan.
Yes.
On Aldersgate Sunday at 8:45 in the evening, John Wesley was walking into a service, and his comment was, I felt my heart strangely warmed. What it immense to is the fact that what he says in this scripture here, that's what we did. That's what we do. That's circumcising our heart. In other words, we're getting rid of all of the other things that were there, and so we're able to have that. I was reading something from it, and
I had a different view of what that
go
was.
ahead. Tell me your view.
No, I couldn't figure it out. I mean, that was the second question I wanted to ask. What did he mean? What is removed? And to me, circumcision is a painful thing.
Not long. Not for long.
Well, you know, I don't know. I haven't had it.
Ask the little boys.
I think we'll start saying.
That's why they do it so young.
That's why they do it so young.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's done while they're still in the nursery before they go home. You know,
Yeah,
not immediately.
but
But you know, you got to realize something. God required that of the males, okay, for having that and understanding the meaning of it, because it all dealt with cleanliness. All right, and so when you get to that, you know, they needed to submit to themselves to God inwardly. In other words, they needed to have their heart strangely warmed. And that makes a difference in what your heart is. And so, in essence, that's their Old Testament writing of having your heart warmed is the circumcision of your heart. In other words, and so it's,
I didn't see it as warming anything, so.
Chip off the old bad stuff.
yeah, you get rid of that. But anyway, it says we do it on the outside, but then they could begin to imitate God's love, as one writer said, and justice in their relationships with each other. And if your hearts are right with God, and that's what getting it circumcised is mean, getting it right with God, then our relationships with other people can be made right as well. And so, when our heart has been cleansed, and that's what happens with circumcision, is cleansing. And when our hearts are cleansed, then we can be reconciled to God, and you and I will begin to see a difference in the way we treat others. That moment for John Wesley developed Methodism. Mm-hmm. That moment. So all of a sudden, here was God circumcising John Wesley's heart in that moment there on Aldersgate Street. And so when we were there, it's a part of where we are and what we're doing. We see every day. And then they got to talking about the ants and thinking about where we are and looking at them. But basically, and you've all had your ideas, but I like what he really says in the very ending part of it, the last part of this chapter. He gets to talking about things that are necessary for us to overcome our stubbornness from the two ants. I love that. I could see what he was getting from, but I would not have surmised that if I'd have been playing with two ants in a swimming pool. I would not have. I mean, he has a far more insight than I, and he realized what transpired in their lives and why they were able to come back. And he says the same thing for us. The ants slowed down, didn't they?
I guess.
He said they didn't move very fast. It took them a while. They were.
They looked like they were dead. But
Yeah.
He let Whitey toss, and he got one of them up, I think, out of the water.
Yeah, he got it out, but then the other one came up, but the other one didn't acknowledge that
He
one.
was waiting for the other one to come rescue.
In other words, he says, but don't wait to get hurt before you learn to help others. In other words, the second ant came up and didn't help him,
Right.
but he wound up having the same thing happen to him, and then he said that they were sort of buddies. All right, they were together, and then they started staying close. And when you realize, when it's sort of like you and me talking about fire ants don't just bite you, they sting you continuously. All right, well, but the fact being is, if you've ever been around fire ants, they come together. They do it together. When you get ants in your kitchen, they come together, don't they? They come in there, they're going after something, and they're going right for it. And so so the final lesson is that we learned it. They didn't want to fall into the same body of water that caused their near fatalness. And so that's where it happens to us. We don't want to be there as well. And so I love the comparisons. I think it was very good that he came up with all this.
Helps you remember things easier with those kinds of comparisons.
But what the basics, and I think Mark is correct in his writing here, what Moses was trying his best to do is to keep generation rest from going into paralysis and stubbornness and being done with it. And so that was there. Maybe God has a very simple answer to help us or help them get rid of our stiff-neckedness. And so we have to ask God to do his work in us. But that takes a lot of what? We can't be stubborn if we're going to ask God to help us, can we?
No.
Thoughts?
I like chapter 8 of Deuteronomy, verse, because I thought,
Read it.
5. Okay. I'll just read the verse, which
Yeah.
is number 5.
Deuteronomy 8:5.
Let's start with 4. Yeah, 8:4.
8:4, okay.
We all know this. For all these 40 years, your clothes haven't grown old, and your feet haven't been blistered or swollen. So you should realize that as a man punishes his son, the Lord punishes you to help you. That really struck me, that one actually. So you should realize that as a man punishes his son, the Lord punishes you to help you. Now, I can remember my dad taken a belt to my oldest brother. There was 3 of us. The 4th one, I guess he was just born in Jonesboro, going to the swimming pool. And we were supposed to be home at a certain time by way of a certain bus. And somehow we missed that bus. Caught the next one. When we got home, my dad, I just remember it, my dad is the gentlest man ever, believe me. And I don't think he ever whipped any of us again. I know he didn't, and Mother didn't. But I remember he took my older brother. They were so worried, so scared. They just thought, since we didn't get home at that appointed time, and when we got there, well, it was his fault that we didn't get home. He took him in the bedroom and took his belt to him. And I remember my older brother, him, crying a little bit. That's going, and it was never discussed. I never did ask my brother, do you remember that? But, and that was wrong.
Yeah,
That was wrong.
But
he
you know
thought
what
it was
happened.
to help him, I'm sure, because, you didn't get y'all home on time. You didn't pay attention to the time. I don't know, I've always thought about it.
Your kids get scared. I came home one time and the back pond was frozen. And the bus got there before I got, to there.
Yeah.
I had to stay late.
Yeah.
And I pull up and I see them walking on that ice. And I didn't know what to do. And I go out there and I'll never forget this. My hand was shaking. Come here! Here! And they got to me, and the first thing I wanted to do was just beat them to death. And I thought, that is the stupidest thing. You were worried about them being dead. Now they're doing and they're safe, and now you want to kill them.
Oh, well, I agree with you where we are because we've all been there. But read the first part of the 4th chapter, 4th verse.
First part of the 4th.
What did it say?
4th verse. Well, this is Deuteronomy 8.
4th verse.
Okay.
Read the first part of it.
Okay, 4, 2, 3, 4. For all these 40 years, your clothes.
That's it.
Haven't grown up.
Yeah.
Now thinking back to this. 40 years. Have you ever had a pair of shoes last for 40 years?
Not yet.
Are you wearing clothes that you wore 40 years ago?
No.
But he says right there, what is it? Go back and read it. What happens to their clothes?
Nothing.
And your feet haven't been blistered or
Ah.
swollen in 40 years of walking. So you should realize that. Well, before that, he said he did it to help you realize that food isn't everything, and that real life comes by obeying every command of God. For all these 40 years, your clothes haven't grown old, and your feet haven't been blistered or swollen. So you should realize that as a man punishes his son, the Lord punishes you to help you. I should have known that earlier. I never got it.
Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this much of it. Next time we'll look at chapter 9 and see what goes on from there. But it really is an interesting thing. When I read that, the first time I ever read that years ago, and I read that verse, and I said, their shoes didn't wear out for 40 years.
I guess I never realized that. I wasn't aware of it. I mean, I know.
I'm like you. I mean, I never considered that. I figured if you're traveling for 40 years and you have 1 million and some odd people, somewhere there's a shoemaker or there's a seamstress or somebody that can
What
sew.
would you make this stuff out of? I mean, it wasn't like
Goods.
That's the big
It
question.
wasn't like they were going to Walmart and buying some material.
And they didn't have a loom and some sheep to shear and make wool out of.
Who knows? Maybe they
Well,
did.
they might have.
Well, I just think they were so.
Fibrous plants.
Yeah, but
Even in the desert, there would be fibrous plants.
well, I'm sure that's a point that we know. But did they know that in 450 or 1400 BC?
God says no. He says their clothes didn't wear out.
Their clothes didn't wear out. Yeah. Hey, great. Have a good one.
I think they were just so aggravated, kind of, because this was not what they expected.
Oh,
The
no,
promised
that's
land
the
was
whole thing.
supposed to be wonderful, that they didn't see the little things.
No, they
Yeah.
didn't.
Well,
And they
it
probably
was,
never thought of the fact that their shoes hadn't worn out.
it
They were
reminds